So about Jasmin, so those who are new to the session today, Jasmin Carter is a self-taught developer and a coding bootcamp graduate, specializing in full-stack development with a front-end focus. Jasmin's journey in the tech industry is fueled by a strong passion for continual growth and exploration. Her recent interests include exploring three.js for 3D graphics and interactive web development. Beyond coding, Jasmin delves into animation projects involving Blender 3D and Adobe After Effects, exploring the captivating world of motion graphics. So over to you, Jasmin. We're really looking forward to a wonderful session like the last time. Thank you.
Hi everyone. So let me share my screen and we can get started. I think, okay, so last week we finished our HTML and our mobile view CSS. So if you would like to follow along from where we left off, I've put the repo of what we have so far in the chat. And it's totally fine if you just want to watch as well. So this is what we have so far. And we want to work on our desktop view now. So I'm going to change my screen size to be, I think this is a pretty wide screen. And I want to look at the Figma file. So just like last week, I want to make some observations about the layout and get an idea of what I want to do, like how I want to do the CSS. So I'm seeing two columns. Like there's our main content column and there's our hero image column. And our main content column is slightly larger than our hero image column. That's what I'm seeing right away. And then I'm also seeing the background image that they gave us, and all of our children element in our main tag is left aligned. And then if we go into our error state, so what we're doing right now is we're looking at the Figma file and we're getting an idea of our layout. So what we want to do is think about like how do we want to build out our desktop view. So everything that we want for like larger screens should go in a media query, essentially. And so based on this image, I know I want two columns, like one for my header, my hero image, and then one for like all of my other elements, basically. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go into my CSS and I'm gonna create a media query. So at media, and this is gonna be a simple media query. So at media, we wanna create a min width. And I want it to have the same breakpoint as our hero, not our hero, our picture element. So if you remember from last time, we have this picture tag here and we gave it a media of 800 pixels. So I want my media query to also be 800 pixels. So, and then you refresh my server, nothing's happening yet. Okay, so then I also want to add my background image. So background, and we have this file of images, and I want it to be my URL. And, oh wait, sorry. So we want to put this on our body. We're starting at the body. And we want to get this background image. And I'm going to use the URL this time. And it's going to take that path. And then I want to set it as center and then cover. Let me close this so there's more space. Okay. So if we go back to our server, we're not quite seeing anything right away because we have all these elements right away. So next thing I want to do is I want to take these like elements that are our children elements of our body, and I want to take them out of their regular flow. So to do that, I'm going to use grid. So I'm going to say display grid. And right away, we don't see like a huge change, but if you're in your inspect tools, your dev tools, you can see the grid by clicking this grid. So if I click off of it, you don't see it. If I click on it, you should see it. And then if you aren't seeing this right away, you can go to your layout and then scroll, and there should be an option to see which your elements that you applied grid to. So now we have grid. So now let's create, I want a 12 by 12 grid. So I'm going to define my grid rows and my grid columns, and I'm going to use grid template area, not grid template area, I'm just going to use grid template, and I'm going to define my rows. I want 12 rows, and they're all going to be like one fraction unit. And then I'm going to do the same thing for my columns. And now we can see our grid. Now we have a grid. Another thing I want to do before I forget is if we look at our design, we can see it takes up the entire screen. And there's no like scroll here. There's nothing to scroll to. So I want to give it a fixed height. So I'm going to give it a height that takes up the entire screen. So I'm going to give it 100 view height, and then I'm going to set my overflow to display hidden. Not display hidden, overflow hidden. Okay. All right. So now we should be able to scroll. Okay. Next thing I want to do is start positioning the children elements that are impacted by our body element. So those are the children's direct, no, sorry, the body's direct children that are impacted by the grid. So that's going to be our picture tag, our header tag, and our main tag. So let's start with the picture tag. And I want it to take up like the whole right side of the screen. So, and I want it to go from the top all the way to the bottom. So I'm going to say grid row. And I want it to go from the first row to the last row. And then I want to say grid column. And I want it to be, so if we look at our design, it's more over to the right. So I want it to start not exactly in the middle, and I want it to go all the way to the end. So if we save it, oh, okay, so now we have our picture in the right side. So I think that's all we need to do for our picture for now. Let's move these elements. So let's go work on this. This was our logo and it was in our header. So our header, I'm gonna move it down because in our design, we have a lot of white space at the top here. And then we also have a lot of white space on the left here. So I want it to be down, and then since all of these elements are like aligned here, I want them all to start in the same place. So I'm gonna move it to the second row, and then I'm gonna define my grid column. I'm gonna make it start on the second column as well. So, and then it'll take up that entire space. So there we have our logo, but when we look at the design, I'm not sure if you remember, but last time in our mobile view, we had to scale the size down because it looked smaller in our mobile view, but this looks closer to the size it was originally, so I'm just gonna reset that width. So I'm gonna get my logo and I'm gonna say width and then initial. So now it's slightly larger. Next, I want to move all of our main content below our logo. So everything is left aligned. There's a lot of white space here. So I'm going to get my main and I'm going to move it down to the 5th row. Oh, I'm going to say, yeah, 5th row. And then let's create our grid column. And I want it to start on the 2nd column. And I want it to have, maybe not go all the way to the end because we have all of this white space. So 6th column, and I think, okay. And then our main element was also a display flex in our mobile view, so it's still a flex container. And so we just need to move all of our children in here to the left or to the start. So I'm going to say text align, let me move this, text align left, and then justify content. It's not justify itself, justify content. Start. And then align item start. So everything is like down more, but I think our H1 needs to be bigger. And then these items need to be spaced bigger. And then our button is bigger from our mobile view as well. So like our button is bigger. So let's start with our H1. So H1, let's give it a bigger font size. Let's try 5 then. I think that is pretty close. And then let's change our, I think the letters are spaced out more. So let's space out our letters. And I think I'm gonna go with 1 rem. I think that looks good. And then I think, okay, I'm gonna play with the line height. And this is optional because like maybe it's just me. I think there's like a small difference in line height here, or maybe it's like slightly too much. I'm gonna keep it for now. And then we need to space out. We need to add the button spacing and then the error text spacing. So because in our mobile view, we spaced out our button and our error icon so that they have like a fixed spacing. So I want to change that spacing if I move my button over. So I'm going to say button, and then I'm going to give it a width of like, let me see. Let's look at our button. Has width of 70. Let's try 90. I think that is really close. And then we also need to change our arrow icon. So let me comment this out so I can see it. So we go to arrow icon. And let's move it to the right. So 60, and this was 70. So let's move it to the right 80. And maybe it needs to be over a little bit more, but I'm gonna leave that alone for now. And then we comment this out. So next thing I want to do is add this spacing. So in our mobile view, we did that with margin bottom. So I'm gonna copy this. And I want to increase it slightly because it looks like it's a little bit bigger. So I'm going to give it 2. And then I want, like, as the screen like scales, I don't really want our form and our paragraph to move. So I'm gonna, before I add our margin, I'm gonna give it a width, a fixed width. So I'm gonna say this paragraph and our form, and I'm gonna give it a width of like 400. All right, so I think that this is pretty good for our desktop view, and feel free to edit that as you want. Before I move on to JavaScript, I wanted to like share this thing that I learned. So when I was like resizing, when I like resize my screen, it like can you can like if you're in responsive mode in the dev tools, you can change your height and width like manually, but let's say you're working on a specific device and it's not in like your listed device, you can go to settings and go to devices, and you can either like find the device you're looking for, and let's say they don't have it, you can like create your own custom sizes here. So anyways, let's move on to our JavaScript. So I'm going to switch this to console, and I'm going to go back to our Figma design because it actually gives us a lot of information. So they're explicitly telling us that this is our error state. And then also let me switch to JavaScript in my JavaScript file. And so what I want to do is just kind of like make some observations based on what I know and what I've done, and try and like write out the steps that I think will help us be successful. So what I'm seeing here is that we see our form, and our form is reacting to our email input. So when this button is clicked, so that's telling me we have some type of form event listener. So I'm going to take a notes. We're listening for an event on our form, or yeah, for a submit event. And then, and we know it's a submit event because our button has a default of submit. And then from this form, we're getting our input value. So we're getting our email input value. So we need our email input value. And then that we are showing our error. We're doing some type of validation because like how would this know that this is wrong? So we're validating our email value. We're doing some type of validation. And then we have an error condition. So, but what they're not telling us is like, what is our success condition? Because if I'm a user, I want to know if my information went through successfully. So I want to create a success condition. Yeah. And then we'll have our error condition. Okay, so let's build this out more. So we have our form. We're listening for an input on our form. And we're getting that we're doing some type of validation. And then we want to, let's define these success conditions more. So what can we do if our form is successful? So if our form is successful, what I want to do is say, thank you, you're subscribed. So what we could do is change our H1 and to say thank you. And then we can change our paragraph. You're subscribed. Look out for our content. Something like that. And then I'm thinking that it's also the end of the user journey. So because they don't really give us any information and it's open-ended, I'm going to hide the form so that our user can't give us more information because like that transaction is done. So we're going to hide the form. Oh, and we're also going to hide all of our error styling. So our error condition is a lot simpler and a lot more explicit. So they just want us to show our error styling. Great. So I think we have enough information to start building our JavaScript. So let me move you guys over here. Great. Let's create some variables. So I know I need my form, so I'm going to create a variable for my form. And I'm going to say document dot query selector, and we're going to get the form. It's our only form, so we don't have to be super explicit there. And then I also want my email. So I'm going to create a variable for email, and I'm going to do the same thing. And we gave our email an ID, so I'm just going to select that ID. Okay, and then the first thing I want to do is just make sure we can listen for the event on our form and get that value from our email input. So I'm going to say form.add event listener, and we're listening for a type of submit. And then I'm going to put in a callback function. And I also want to take that event and prevent the default behavior. And then because we don't want it to run like right away. And I want to get my email value. So what I want to do is create a new variable for something that can change and for something that we know is like the current value of this thing. So I'm going to create a new variable called email value and set it to our email dot value. And to make sure we got it, let's console log it. Save this and let's test this here. Test. Well, this is really hard to see. Let me just, I'm going to write test at testing. And all we want to know is if it shows up in our console. And it worked. Great. We're getting our current email value. Maybe I can make this bigger. Okay. So the next thing in our list is to validate this email. I found this article that I wanted to share, and it goes over like email validation with regex. Regex is how we can validate, how we can search for patterns in strings. So I feel like this is a really good article to check out. And I'm actually going to use the string that they give us in the article for email validation. And what I want to do is I want to create a helper function. So I'm going to just say function. I'm going to call it email validation. Or no, I'm going to call it validate email. And it's going to take in, we know we are going to like use this function to validate our email input. So I'm just going to put a parameter called email, and then we're going to we're going to create a variable for our regex, and I'm going to just call it RE, short for regex, which is short for regular expressions. And then I'm going to take the pattern that they give us and put it in a variable that I can use to compare my email value to. And I want this to compare the value and just tell me if it's true or false. So I'm going to take this and say test, and I want it to test my email as a string, as a lowercase string. And so all this is going to do is tell us if this is true or false. And we want that to be like our gatekeeper for our success or our error condition. So because we have this condition, I'm going to test it by creating an if statement, and then we get to use our helper function. We're going to put in our email value because that's the current value of our input. So if this is true, we're going to have our success condition. And then if this is false or else, we'll have our error condition. And we can test that by console logging. Let's just say console log, yay, because it worked. And then we'll do the opposite. We'll say console log, nay, because it didn't work. Let's save it. And then let me go into my live server and let's put in something that we know will work. So let's say test at correct.com, and we should see a yay. We got a yay. And then let's do something wrong. So test at wrong, and we say a nay. Great. So now let's think through our success and our error. So basically, our success is going to grab our error styling and hide it. And then it's also going to change the H1 and paragraph tag. And then our error condition is going to show our error styling. So what we could do is say document.querySelector and get like all of the elements from our HTML, but I can see how that would be a lot of repetition because we'd have to say document.querySelector for our like dot error icon or dot text in both of these places. And so what we could do is we can create more helper functions to handle those conditions and then put them in our if and else statements. So we need a helper function for our success, and we need a helper function for our error. And because we're using this in multiple places, we're using the values that will go inside of these functions in multiple places. I should start by creating some variables with a global scope. And I want to create the variables that I know are going to be repeated. So I know it's going to be repeated. I know it's going to be repeated the error icon. So I'm going to say error icon is equal to document dot query selector, and we'll get our error icon class. And then I'm going to do the same thing for my error text, except it's going to select text. So we need to create helper functions for our success and our error. And then we can create a helper function that'll help us like toggle what's inside of our helper functions. That sounds like that sounds funny. Okay, so we have a function to handle success, and we know we need to, in our success, we need to hide. I'm just gonna write some notes. We need to hide our error stylings, and then we need to change our H1 and our paragraph tag. And I know that this is the only place that I'm gonna do these things, so it would make sense to say like document dot query selector. We'll get our H1. And because we're only doing this here, we don't need to create more variables outside of these functions. So let's say, let's change the inner text and let's set it equal to, oh, thank you. Oh, and then let's do the same thing for our paragraph. What did I say? Okay, so, and then we want to do our helper function for our error. So function error, oh, handle error. And I'm just going to write out what we need to show our error settings here. And I think that's all we need to do for the error. So now let's create helper functions for our helper functions, because we would continue to repeat ourselves if we wrote like if we wrote the toggles inside of our helper function. So let's create a function to show to handle the showing, and let's create a helper function to handle the hiding. So let's call it function show, and it's going to take in the element that needs to be shown, and it's going to say element style display is equal to block, and then we're going to do the opposite for hide. Let's make this a bit more descriptive. Okay. So now for our error styling, we need to get, let's go back to our Figma file. So we need to get this border, we need to get this icon, and we need to get this error text. So I'm going to say email dot class list. So our email is representing our input tag. So, and we're going to say add error because we made that error class in our styling. And then we're going to get our, this is going to show. So we're going to get our show function, and we're going to give it our error icon. And we're going to do the same thing for our error text. Okay. And then I want to basically do the opposite in my success. And I think that's what we need to do, but let's test it and just say handle success. And this is going to be handle error. And then, so let me refresh this and let's give it something we know it will work. Okay, great. So we're seeing our text change. Oh, you know what I forgot to do? I forgot to hide the form. So let's go back to our success. Let's grab our hide element. And then let's just give it our form. So let's try this again. And let's say test at working.com. Let's test it. Okay, great. It's the end of our user story. We know our success is working. Now let's test our error icon, condition. Let's test our error condition. So we know, let's put something that won't work. Just say test, wrong. We know it's wrong. Great. We're seeing everything work. We're not repeating ourselves. And now we can remove our console logs because we don't need them anymore. And I think we're done with the project. Yes, we did this within an hour. So glad. So thank you all for coming. I will stop sharing my screen and I'll open it up to questions or comments.
So Maria had a question asking what is a tool? I believe it's a grid, Maria.
Yeah. Um, For the, were you asking about the styling or?
Yes, that's what I believe. Yes.
Yeah, so we were using display grid. Like we switched from the default to grid, which I feel like is really helpful when you need to take elements outside of their regular flow and just like move them around. It's a lot more direct than just saying like trying to use Flexbox.
Yeah, that was really helpful, especially, yeah, when you were moving it around. I don't see any other questions, but if you have any questions, please drop in the chat or you can ask it right now. Yeah, looks like we don't have, but yes, we are in a sales grid template was new to me. Need to have, yeah.
Yeah. I feel like it's really helpful, especially when you're first starting to learn grid. Like this was my experience. It was easier for me to use like grid template than grid template area. So like grid template, you can define your rows and your columns, or you can just say grid template rows, grid template columns, like you can define them that way. Um, and then grid template area, you can like literally, you're using like symbols or words to describe like where you want elements to be and writing it out. I can find some resources on Grid that are really helpful, and I'll share them in Slack later.
Sure, that would be really helpful. Thank you, Jasmine. So Maria asks, in this project, what do you find most challenging?
I think styling the form was challenging for me at first because they had that those overlapping elements like the button, the icon were on top of the input. So looking at that right away, I was like, okay, how can I position them so that they're related and overlapping? I couldn't use like you can use Flexbox or Grid. I decided to go with position absolute because I I knew it would work. I knew it would be like the easiest way to get these items to overlap, but also be contained within the form element. So yeah, that was fun.
Mhm. Yes. Um, any other questions? So while we were taking class, I was almost convinced that I was not doing proper CSS or HTML, I mean, JavaScript all this while. I personally could take a lot from this session, both the sessions, last time and this session. So thank you so much for this workshop. So,
Thank you for having me.
so anybody have any questions or comments, please feel free to put in the chat. Anna says she also learned a lot. She also learned a lot from the session.
Thanks, everyone.
So if you don't have any questions, then maybe we can wrap the session for today. Thank you so much, Jasmine, for this amazing workshop. Thank you, everyone,
Thank
for
you.
joining.
Have a great weekend.